"Captain," came the calm voice of Lieutenant Jackson, his second-in-command, who approached with a data pad in hand. "We received a distress signal from the outer colonies. Tyranny forces are amassing at the border." Elias frowned, his jaw tightening. The Tyranny had been restless for months, their rhetoric growing more aggressive with each passing day. But this was the first sign of outright rebellion. He had hoped they would settle for negotiations, but now it seemed war was inevitable. "How many colonies affected?" Elias asked, his voice betraying none of the growing unease gnawing at him. "3," Jackson replied, "and the attacks are becoming more organized. It's not just random raids anymore. They're rallying under a single banner, some calling it a liberation front." A wave of bitterness swept through Elias. Liberation? The word itself was a cruel irony. Humans had never sought to dominate these alien species. Their nuclear ships were meant to protect, not oppress. But somehow, humanity had become the symbol of tyranny in the eyes of the galaxy, a twisted legacy of old misunderstandings. "Send out reconnaissance," Elias ordered. "I want full intel on their movements before we make contact." As Jackson moved to carry out the command, another figure stepped forward. Counselor Xana, the Tyranny diplomat assigned to the Resolute as part of the fragile peace efforts. His slender, serpentine form glided across the deck with quiet grace, his silver eyes reflecting the stars beyond the viewport. "Captain Morven," Xander said, his voice smooth but edged with tension. "This rebellion, my people believe they are rising up against oppression. They see humanity as tyrants, holding the power to destroy entire worlds." Elias clenched his fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Is that what they've been told?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the alien. "That we're tyrants?" Xander bowed his head slightly. "It is more than a story. The fear of your nuclear ships is very real. We Tyranny have long memories of destruction. Some still whisper about the day the humans tested their weapons on one of our colonies, obliterating it." Elias's heart sank. He knew the story well. An accident, a catastrophic failure during a military test, had caused the annihilation of a Tyranny outpost decades ago. But that incident had been twisted over the years, growing into a legend of human cruelty. "It was an accident," Elias said. "No one wanted that outcome. We've never used those weapons in aggression, and we never will." Xander's silver eyes softened with something akin to sympathy. "You know that, Captain. I know that. But the rebellion feeds on fear, not truth." Elias paced the deck, the weight of his command settling heavier on his shoulders. The Resolute, armed with its nuclear arsenal, was a symbol of peace by deterrence. And yet, in the eyes of the Tyranny, it was nothing more than a sword hanging over their heads. "What's the current situation?" Elias asked, turning back to Jackson, who was monitoring the incoming reports. "Confirmed sightings of Tyranny warships. They formed a blockade around our colonies, preventing supplies and reinforcements from getting through. It's not a full attack yet, but they're close." Elias nodded slowly. This wasn't just a rebellion. It was a prelude to all-out war. And if they didn't act carefully, the galaxy could burn. "Open a communication channel to the Tyranny leadership," Elias ordered, stepping toward the center of the bridge. "Let's see if we can still talk them down." Jackson hesitated. "Are you sure, Captain? They might see it as weakness." Elias met his gaze, steel in his eyes. "We're not here to start a war. If there's even a sliver of a chance for peace, we take it." Within moments, the view screen flickered to life, revealing the grim face of General Korof, the leader of the Tyranny rebellion. His features were harsh, his skin a deep violet, his eyes burning with defiance. "Captain Morven," Korof spat, his voice crackling through the transmission. "I've been waiting for this moment. Your reign of terror ends here." Elias stayed calm, though he could feel the tension rising from his crew. "General Korof, there's no need for this conflict. We are not your enemies. Let's sit down and negotiate terms." "There are no terms with tyrants," Korof interrupted, his fury palpable. "You hold the power to destroy worlds, and you think we'll let you enslave us with fear? We fight for freedom, Captain, and we will die for it if we must. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in heavy silence. Elias exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had tried diplomacy, but the Tyranny rebellion had already made up its mind. Now, the galaxy teetered on the edge of war, and he was at the center of it. "Prepare for engagement," he said quietly, his voice filled with a grim resolve. "But we hold fire unless absolutely necessary. We're not the monsters they think we are." The Resolute slipped through the vastness of space, its engines humming beneath the tension, hanging in the air. Captain Elias Morven stood rigid at the center of the bridge, watching the Tyranny fleet gather on the edge of the view screen, like vultures circling prey. The Tyranny warships were smaller, sleeker, but their numbers made them formidable. 10 warships, Lieutenant Jackson muttered, his eyes scanning the tactical display. "They've reinforced their blockade. More are incoming." Elias didn't respond immediately, his mind racing with the implications. The Tyranny were throwing everything they had into this. Diplomacy had failed, and they were determined to paint humanity as the oppressor, the looming threat to their existence. "We've got enough firepower to wipe them out," Commander Rook said, his voice a low growl as he stepped to Elias's side. "A single nuclear strike and they'll scatter. They're playing a dangerous game." Elias shot him a sharp glance. "We're not launching nukes, Rook. Not unless we're left with no other choice." Rook's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further. The tension on the bridge thickened, the crew silently awaiting the captain's next move. They all knew the Resolute could turn this battle in an instant, but Elias wasn't ready to cross that line. Not yet. "Open a channel to General Korof," Elias ordered, his voice calm, though every fiber of his being was bracing for the worst. The view screen flickered, and the stern face of General Korof reappeared. His violet skin glistened under the cold light of his warship's bridge, his eyes sharp with disdain. Behind him, the Tyranny crew moved like ghosts, preparing for the inevitable clash. "Korof," Elias began, taking a step closer to the screen, "we can avoid this. You don't need to sacrifice your people. Let's find a way to stop the fighting before it begins." Korof sneered, shaking his head. "You think you can bargain with us, Morven? You think we'll bow to your demands? You've held this galaxy hostage with your planet killers for far too long." Elias felt the accusation land like a blow, but he held firm. "You misunderstand. The Resolute and ships like her were built for defense, not conquest. We never intended to use them to dominate anyone. Defense?" Korof's eyes flared with fury. "You call the annihilation of my homeworld defense?" Elias froze, the words twisting in his gut. He knew the story Korof was referring to, the Tyranny colony that had been accidentally destroyed during a failed military test decades ago. It had been a disaster, an unimaginable tragedy, but it had not been an act of aggression. Yet, the Tyranny had never seen it that way. For them, it was proof of humanity's ruthlessness, a scar that had never healed. "I know what happened," Elias said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "But it wasn't what you think. That colony was destroyed by a mistake, not by malice." Korof's face darkened, the pain of old wounds flashing across his features. "A mistake that cost millions of lives, Captain. Do you know what it's like to watch your world burn? To know that a single human finger on a button decided your fate?" Elias felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. He couldn't erase the past, couldn't undo the pain that the Tyranny had suffered. But he had to try, even if Korof's mind was already set on war. "General," Elias said, his tone firm but compassionate, "I can't change what happened, but I can stop this from escalating further. We don't have to keep repeating the same mistakes. Let us negotiate." Korof's lip curled in contempt. "Negotiation?" he spat. "You speak of peace while your ships hold the power to destroy entire planets. There will be no negotiation while your weapons exist. You humans are nothing more than tyrants with the power to end worlds. We will fight for our freedom, even if it means our extinction." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving Elias staring at the blank screen, his mind reeling. Koruf wasn't interested in peace. The Tyranni had embraced the narrative of human tyranny so fully that reason had become irrelevant. They were fighting for survival as much as for freedom, driven by the fear of humanity's immense, misunderstood power. Jackson looked to Elias, his expression tight. "What now, Captain?" "They're not going to back down." Elias exhaled slowly, feeling the pressure of the moment coil around him. The Tyranni fleet was closing in, preparing for battle. He had tried diplomacy, offered them peace, but the fear they harbored was too deep, too entrenched in their history. And now, war was on the horizon. "We stand our ground," Elias said, his voice filled with grim resolve. "But we do not engage unless we have no other choice. We show them that we are not the monsters they believe us to be." Rook's eyes darkened. "And if they keep pushing?" Elias's gaze hardened. "Then we defend ourselves. But we will not be the ones to start this war." The bridge fell silent as the Tyranni ships loomed closer, their weapon systems charging. The tension was suffocating, but Elias remained steadfast, refusing to let fear or aggression drive his decisions. He had sworn to protect, not to destroy, and he would hold to that oath, no matter how dire the situation became. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Elias ordered, his hands tightening on the console. "And pray they see reason before it's too late." The Resolute shook as enemy fire rained down on its shields, the deep hum of energy coursing through the ship vibrating underfoot. Captain Elias Morvan stood at the command console, watching as Tyranni ships darted like insects around his vessel. They fired relentlessly, probing for weakness, but the Resolute held firm. "Shields at 73%, Jackson reported, his voice taut. "We're taking heavy fire, Captain. I don't know how much longer we can hold them off without striking back." Elias's mind raced. The Tyranni were relentless, driven by their hatred of humanity's power. Every passing moment brought them closer to war, and yet he couldn't bring himself to give the order to retaliate. Once they crossed that line, there would be no going back. "Maintain defensive posture," Elias ordered, his voice firm. "Focus on keeping us intact, not on destroying them." Commander Rook, standing nearby, let out a low growl of frustration. "Captain, we're sitting ducks. If we don't hit back soon, we'll be torn apart." Elias ignored him, his eyes fixed on the tactical map. There had to be another way. He wasn't about to let this devolve into the bloodshed the Tyranni seemed so eager to provoke. But the question gnawed at him. Why now? Why this sudden, aggressive push? The Tyranni had simmered with resentment for years, but something had ignited this rebellion. And the deeper he thought, the more he realized that fear alone wasn't enough to explain the sudden escalation. "Counselor Zanner," Elias called, turning to the Tyranni diplomat who stood silently at the edge of the bridge. "We need answers. Why are your people so determined to fight? What aren't we seeing?" Zanner stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. His silver eyes flickered with something Elias hadn't noticed before. Hesitation, perhaps guilt. "Captain," Zanner said, his voice quieter than usual, "there are forces at play here that go beyond the rebellion's stated motives. General Koruf and his people believe they are fighting for freedom, but there are leaders within their ranks who are manipulating that belief for their own gain." Elias narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Zanner drew a breath, his gaze distant as if dredging up memories long buried. During the ancient war, when humanity and the Tyranni first clashed, there were acts of mercy on both sides, gestures that went unrecorded in the official histories. One such moment was when a Tyranni colony was on the brink of annihilation by an external threat, a species that no longer exists. It was a human ship that saved them. My people owe their very existence to humanity's intervention. Elias blinked, his surprise evident. Then why the rebellion? Why this hatred? Zanner's eyes darkened. The leaders of the Tyranni resistance, those who manipulate Koruf and his followers, have twisted that history. They fear that the truth, our debt to humanity, would undermine their ability to rally others to their cause. They've stoked the fires of fear, amplifying the legend of your destructive power, while burying the acts of compassion that saved us. If the truth came to light, they would lose their grip on the movement. Elias felt a surge of anger rise within him. All this death, all this senseless destruction, based on lies and manipulation. The Tyranny Rebellion wasn't purely about liberation. It was about consolidating power, about controlling the narrative. And the galaxy was suffering because of it. Why didn't you tell us this sooner? Elias demanded, his voice hard. You knew, and you let this escalate. Xana looked away, shame flickering across his features. I hoped the truth would emerge naturally, that the rebellion would falter on its own. But now, it's too far gone. Korov and his people believe they are fighting for their survival, and they won't listen to reason as long as those leaders keep feeding them lies. Elias clenched his fists. This war was being fought on two fronts, one on the battlefield and another in the hearts and minds of the Tyranny people. If he could expose the truth, perhaps he could fracture the rebellion's leadership and prevent further bloodshed. But time was running out. Do we have proof? Elias asked, his voice steadier now, focused. Xana nodded. There are records, hidden transmissions. We intercepted some communications that reveal the Tyranny leaders' true intentions. They knew humanity wasn't a threat, but they needed an enemy to unite their people. Then we use it, Elias said, his mind already formulating a plan. We leak the truth, get those transmissions into the hands of Tyranny civilians. If they see that their leaders have been lying to them, they'll start questioning the rebellion's motives. Rook stepped forward, skepticism etched on his face. And if they don't care, if they keep fighting, even after they know the truth, Elias glanced at him, his gaze hard. Then at least we've done everything we can to stop this without wiping out their fleet. We're not murderers, Rook. We fight for peace, not conquest. Jackson turned from his station, a flicker of hope in his voice. Captain, I can reroute the communications channels and send the transmissions anonymously. It'll take some time, but we can make sure the message spreads. Do it, Elias ordered, his voice resolute, and prepare for the worst. Korov won't take this well. As Jackson moved to carry out the command, Elias allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The truth was a fragile thing, easily bent and broken by those who sought power. But it was also the one weapon they had left that might bring an end to this war without reducing entire worlds to ash. The bridge of the Resolute was tense with anticipation. Captain Elias Morven stood at the center, his gaze fixed on the swirling Tyranny fleet outside the viewport. They hovered just beyond the range of the ship's weapons, their aggression momentarily tempered as the truth Elias had unveiled spread across their channels like wildfire. Transmission confirmed, Captain, Jackson reported, his fingers flying over the controls. The data is out. Tyranny civilians are starting to receive it. Elias gave a tight nod, his mind racing. He had done everything he could. The intercepted communications, revealing the lies of the rebellion's leaders, were now public. The narrative that had fueled the rebellion, the myth of humanity as a bloodthirsty oppressor, was crumbling. But the question that remained was whether it would be enough. They'll try to discredit it, Elias muttered, almost to himself. Korov won't let go of his grip that easily. As if on cue, the view screen crackled to life once again, revealing the enraged face of General Korov. His violet eyes burned with fury, his face twisted in disbelief and anger. Morven, Korov bellowed, his voice crackling with the energy of barely restrained rage. You think you can break us with your lies? You think this propaganda will sway my peoples? Elias held Korov's gaze, his own expression steady. It's not lies, Korov. It's the truth. Your leaders have been manipulating you, stoking fear and hatred for their own gain. The transmissions prove it. You expect us to believe you? Korov spat, his fists clenching. After everything humanity has done, you think a few doctor files will undo generations of suffering? No. We fight for freedom. Then fight for it, Elias said calmly, but don't fight for a lie. Your people have the right to know what's been hidden from them. They have the right to make their own decisions, not be driven by fear. Cora fell silent, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions. Behind him, Elias could see the Tirani officers shifting uneasily. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and Elias knew that once doubt took root, it was only a matter of time before it blossomed into something greater. "Captain," Jackson said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "we're getting more transmissions from Tirani ships. Some of their crews are starting to stand down." Elias allowed himself a breath of relief, but he wasn't ready to relax just yet. Korov was still in command, and his rage was a volatile force that could tip the balance back into chaos at any moment. "Korov," Elias said, his tone softening, "I understand your pain. I understand why you're angry, but this war won't bring back the people you've lost. It won't erase the scars. We can find another way forward, together. It's not too late." For a long moment, Korov said nothing, his violet eyes narrowing as he stared at Elias. The silence stretched across the void between their ships, heavy and fragile, as though a single wrong word could shatter it entirely. Finally, Korov exhaled, his shoulders slumping as some of the fire in his eyes dimmed. "You speak of peace, but peace under the shadow of your weapons is no peace at all. How can we ever trust you while your nuclear ship still exists?" Elias felt the weight of the question settle over him like a shroud. The Resolute, the very thing that had protected humanity for so long, was also the symbol of everything the Tirani feared. And Korov was right. So long as humanity held the power to annihilate planets, there could never be true trust between their species. "You're right," Elias said quietly. "As long as these weapons exist, there will always be fear. That's why, after this conflict ends, I'll advocate for dismantling our nuclear fleet. No more planet killers. No more weapons of mass destruction." The bridge fell into stunned silence. Even Rook, who had fought tooth and nail to maintain humanity's military power, looked shocked by Elias's words. But Elias knew it was the only way. If there was any hope for lasting peace, humanity would have to take the first step. Korov's eyes widened in disbelief, his voice uncertain for the first time. "You would do that? Give up your greatest weapon?" "If it means peace, yes," Elias said firmly. "We built these ships to protect ourselves from a threat that no longer exists. Now, they only serve to spread fear. It's time to let them go." For the first time, Korov's expression softened, the hardness in his gaze giving way to something more uncertain, more human. He turned away from the view screen for a moment, speaking quietly to one of his officers before returning his focus to Elias. "We will stand down, Captain Morven," Korov said, his voice weary but resolute. "But know this. If your people betray us again, there will be no more negotiations. This is your last chance." Elias nodded. "I understand." The transmission cut off, and the Tirani fleet began to slowly withdraw, their ships moving away from the Resolute one by one. The bridge of the human ship erupted into quiet cheers and sighs of relief as the immediate threat passed. But Elias remained still, staring out into the void, knowing that this fragile peace was only the beginning. The war had been averted, for now, but the work of rebuilding trust between two species, after so much fear and bloodshed, would take a lifetime. And Elias was prepared to see it through, no matter how long it took.